a joy and an honor to be asked. So thank you. And it's so great meeting you and Chris and Andrew, getting to know the group.
So Holly, just share your screen and go for it. You're live.
Yep.
Okay, that was quick. Let me share my screen here. Let's get ourselves up and running. Here we go. So let me move this here. All righty. So let me just make sure you can see the screen well.
Yep. PowerPoint looks great. You look great. Go for it.
Excellent. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Holly Shannon, and I have a podcast called Culture Factor 2.0, and it was launched right at the start of COVID. It was originally launched to talk to the C-suite about company culture, but COVID kind of shaped the whole narrative on that, so we can't just look at company culture as it was. We have to look at company culture as it evolved over the past year. And as we know, the new normal is anything but normal, right? So I learned a lot over this past year. I had the gift of being able to speak to many people in the C-suite, leaders, startups, founders, all sorts of companies. And so I learned what used to work. I also learned what's working going forward. So I think my job here today is to share with you what has worked in the past, what are the new tools that are out there. So let's just take a look at what it looks like now. Welcome to your headquarters. So I think this probably looks pretty familiar for a lot of people. Maybe, you're both working. Your office is the kitchen or a spare bedroom, if you're lucky to have that. Kids under tow, homeschooling. I don't really have to give you the down and dirty because you've all been really experiencing that this past year. But this doesn't make light of it, but let's be honest, this is what it looks like. So going on forward, let's take a look at through the lens of the C-suite and what I've learned throughout this year a little bit, things that worked and still work. So I've learned from a lot of leaders that diversity is so important, and not just diversity of hire, but diversity of thought. But I'm so happy that the DEI space is really finally getting its voice and exploding because clearly it's something that makes a big difference in a healthy company culture. Compassionate leadership, having trust from your leadership as well is really important. The ability to lean into conflict. There are toxic cultures. There's things that just did not work in the workplace. Better meetings, a sense of entrepreneurial spirit. All companies, especially startups, and they all thrive with that kind of energy. So how do we harness that? Growth mindset. You come to the table as somebody who's excited to be in a growth opportunity, but you need to feed that, right? You need to feed and educate the people who work for you. So how I'm going to frame this is I'm going to look at tools from the past that have worked, and we've already started the conversation on that, but I'm using a case study, and I'm using Zappos, and this was presented to me through Chris and the Podfest family, that Peter Shay was a huge component in shaping the Podfest culture and creating a sense of community together. It was a partnership. So I felt it was really an interesting way to look at what they did well, because I think they're really a part of the ethos of Podfest. And I think their messaging should be a part of the ethos of a lot of companies. So that brings me actually to Peter Shay, the late Peter Shay, sad to say. But what I'd like to do is highlight his achievements. And he was a pioneer in company culture. What was really interesting is when Zappos started, They were small, they were scrappy. He hired friends, he hired people that were just like excited to be on the verge of something new. And the byproduct of that was actually good company culture. Everybody kind of rallied around a unified message. And he had a real sense of community starting. He had a couple of missteps along the way because they grew fast, as a lot of startups do. And in struggling to stay afloat, they hired a lot of people that maybe didn't fit into the culture. So it brings us to that conversation of hiring. That is a really important component, especially if you've established a good company culture, you want to keep it that way. So they grew fast and they recalibrated. So what Peter learned, he learned from experience, but he also learned from studying other companies and what separates good from great. And I think what he found is that the secret sauce for him was customer service, which is really kind of crazy for an online company, right? How many people think of online companies focusing on customer service? He took it another step and he focused on applying this to partnerships with vendors. He also took the next step of making sure that he was behind the growth of his employees, and that meant personally and professionally. So I think Pioneer is really like a good way to stage Peter Shay in this whole picture. He got it. He knew what culture was. He knew that culture is strategy. And Seth Godin also says this in his book, This is Marketing. And I think that I'm a big believer in that. So let's take a look. We all know what happened on March 2020. And so now let's address reality. Let's marry together the past, and let's take a look at boots on the ground now. So we need to recalibrate, right? We need to look at, I've interviewed so many leaders, and I've learned from them that AQ is really important. What's AQ? AQ is the adaptability quotient. And we all have that in ourselves, and companies have that as well. It's so how do we do that? We open the door for agility. We open the door for innovation. We've seen a lot of innovation this year, which is great. I think we need to focus more on tools that are for remote work. A lot of companies jumped into remote, obviously, and it was pretty sudden. So they didn't necessarily have remote-ready tools. There are companies that are just killing it in that because they were remote first. So taking a little study into that, and I'll address that a little later on in the presentation. I think the other thing we need to look at is intrapreneurial spirit. There's a lot of emerging leadership in companies, and we need to focus on that spirit and that energy and put it to good use. Education and investing employee growth. It's the same thing Peter Shay did, right? So the past still works. Social media culture, I think we need to be more transparent. We're seeing a lot of companies thrive by doing that. Companies like Morning Brew that are growing publicly on Twitter. Companies like Fast that are hiring and onboarding on Twitter. Companies like Gravy that are on LinkedIn and really lifting up the employees regularly through posting and showing what honoring the people that work for you, what that looks like. So transparency in social media culture is really important because let's be honest, leaders are under the microscope. So it's probably better to get out there and be seen. We could go forward and go as micro as reduction in excessive meetings, but putting guardrails on that is really important. People don't like the optional mandatory happy hour. At the end of the week, they just want to be with their families, and we already have a difficult time separating work-life balance. So we need to look at that. more closely. And then, of course, we need to definitely take a look at burnout and mental health care, because that is the fallout of COVID. It has always been there, but COVID has really shined a light on it. And so I think we need to take a look at normalizing that. So we can't do any of these things unless we take a look at the elephant in the room. I did a post recently on LinkedIn, and it said, if you ask the C-suite if they have good company culture, they'll say yes. Leon Health Science posts that 85% of people hate their job. So which is it? So I think that company culture was already suffering, and there might be an opportunity now with the adaptability that we are all, we're all working on, right? Because of COVID. So I think we need to take a look at some stats, and so that we're looking at a really clear picture of that. And I will read this. Post-COVID, there were 26,000 assessments that showed over 77% of employees presented signs of early burnout. What's the most interesting part of this is that pre-COVID, this number was still over 60%. So as you can see, burnout and which is a big component of not liking your job, is something that was already present, and now it's starting to go off the charts. So we need to normalize the conversation around burnout and mental health and adjust for that. And now that we have some new tools, maybe there's ways to communicate better so that we can start building culture and building individuals, as opposed to just looking at the structure of the company. So what's the secret sauce? It's a boss that knows that burnout will destroy its workforce and that productivity will suffer in the long haul. Productivity is doing well for a lot of companies because people are fearful of losing their jobs. People are just trying to stay afloat. They're trying to perform as best they can. They're trying to keep up with people in their company, but they might have 2 kids under tow and they're trying to homeschool, or they have aging parents, or they can't get any time off and they haven't worked out in months. So this is the secret sauce. So let's address what's working. And I think in concert with corporate responsibility, we can create a space for company culture to improve. We can find purpose and meaning in our work. How do we do that? How do we enjoy being together again? We focus on emerging leadership. We've already spoke about that a little bit. Okay, it's important. It's important to recognize leaders that want to shine. It's important to understand that work from home does not work for everybody, and that a hybrid situation might have to be accounted for. There might be budgeting for, like a WeWork type of environment. Time off. Time off is critical. It's critical in that if leaders don't emulate it, if leaders don't take time off and put in their email, I'm unavailable, I'm on vacation with my family, or I'm taking a couple of days to recoup, then their workforce doesn't know how to do it and they don't think it's okay. So you need to make time off a regular part, and you need to applaud people when they do it. Like you need to show that. That's part of the transparency. And you need to be transparent about the conversations around burnout. Like I said, we need to normalize it. Maybe there needs to be a therapist on staff. Maybe there needs to be regular one-on-one check-ins and buddy systems and things where people can work together to help each other during those hard times. Onboarding, that's another thing. When you onboard, put the guardrails up. Recognize that new people coming in, if you set expectations of this is what productivity looks like, but this is also what time off looks like. And we want you to stay healthy. We want you to go do yoga. We want you to work out. We want you to do whatever makes you feel good, right? It's really important to have all of these things. But more importantly, it's really important that the C-suite and leadership walks the talk, that they don't just say that they're going to do all of these things, that they actually do it. And I think the next step for is to be a leader. Let's look inward as well. We can't wait for companies to do everything. They do have a responsibility, but you have a responsibility to you. At the end of the day, if you're excited at some of the innovation and change happening in your company, step up. Now is your opportunity. Now is your opportunity to be seen and heard. And a lot of companies are doing this successfully. A lot of people are doing this successfully. So I encourage you to step into yourself, step into your space, step into your power, step into your expertise. Take advantage of any education that's put before you, or decide to take on some things yourself, and then bring that to the table. Show the leaders. So as I start to get close to concluding my presentation, I want to just step through this. I'm going to actually go to the bottom of this and point out purchase of mental health apps have increased by over 200%. Like I'm saying, be that person, emerge, lead, grow, innovate, reinvent, recalibrate yourself. Some things we do have to do on our own. And I love to see actually that the mental health apps have increased, because I'd like to think that some of the things there are things like Calm and Headspace and Insight, strategies that you can deploy for meditation, yoga, breathing, tools that you can use all day, every day. Taking the past, looking at companies like Zappos, where they used culture as strategy. Looking at the present, there are companies out there that are just really doing a great job of this. GitLab is one. They were a remote first company 15 years ago when they started with 3G. So it is completely possible to be a fully remote company. They have free tools all over their website. Watch companies on Twitter, for example, like Fast. Like I said, they're hiring and onboarding. Backstage Capital, they're showing new founders on there and talking about their growth. Morning Brew, their personal branding, scaling, and interacting publicly. Look at companies that are doing company culture well now, and emulate that in the future. So let's take a look at that. What can we do there? Well, guess what? There's companies that are emerging. I had quoted Leon Healthcare in the beginning, and I'm bringing them at the end of my presentation. They have an AI-powered software that assists in mitigating burnout. It recognizes when your employees are starting to burn out and creates tools to help mitigate. It also creates tools to help recognize when they're ready to push for growth. And it also creates guardrails for leaders to determine when is the best time for that Series A round, when is the best time to push for harder sales quotas, using new tools out there, and not just going with only what worked in the past, because as we know, the new normal is anything but normal. So what I'd like to say in closing here, could the pandemic strangely be a gift for bad company culture? Could it be a wake-up call for change? And could it be a wake-up call for you as an individual? Is it your opportunity to contribute to building a healthy company culture? The answer is yes. I think now more than ever is an opportunity. I think the hashtags for 2021 will be empathy and will be community. A lot of new roles coming down the pike, head of remote, head of community, not a lot of new things happening in that space. And I think it's welcome and needed, and is an opportunity for companies to grow and create communities, just like Podfest does here, and just how they did with the Zappos family. Creating community is really critical right now. Do it on social media where it feels good for you. There's communities all over social media, but also step off social media and reach out to, the people around where you live. It's really, really critical. So thank you, Mark. And thank you, Chris and Andrew and the Podfest community for joining me here today. Where can you reach me? hollyshannon.com, but I'm sure Mark has more to add there. But I just want to say thank you for starters, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And absolutely head over to hollyshannon.com.